Hi, I'm Michal Rimon. I'm the CEO of Access Israel. Very, very happy to be here with you today. And the purpose of today's presentation is the basics, just to really accessibility one-on-one, understand the terminology, make sure we're all communicating and talking on the same page. A little bit about Access Israel. Access Israel was established 21 years ago. We are the leading organization in Israel promoting accessibility for people with disabilities, all types of disabilities in all areas of accessibility, which I will elaborate on later on. The idea is to promote accessibility and make Israel and the world a place where people with various disabilities are integrated and inclusive into society with dignity, with respect, with equal rights, with maximum independence, living their life, quality of life like everyone else. We do so in many various activities, but today we are going to focus really on the terminology aspects of what we are doing. We are going to cover and understand what is a person with disability. We are going to understand accessibility. What does it mean and what does it include? The unique Israeli legislation on this subject. Inclusion, which is a term that is used very, very widely, but let's really focus and understand what we're talking about, and the future of accessibility. Now, who are we talking about? The statistics. So first of all, in Israel, for example, we have 18% of Israeli population, people with disabilities, all types of disabilities, physical, hearing disabilities, visual disabilities, mental disabilities, cognitive and communicational. Now, please note, the general global statistics are between 15 to 25% of the populations. It varies from country to countries, depending on the scope or the exact definition of that country. But the idea is that accessibility is good not only for these 18%, which include, of course, people with disabilities and the elderly who have disabilities, but also, try to think about it, a parent with a stroller, people who are very tall or very short or obese, or the elderly that don't have accessibility. Eventually, we all prefer an accessible route. I always wish good health, but at the age of 99, we will always prefer the escalator or elevator or ramp rather than taking the stairs. So this is what we're talking about. The definition in Israel for people with disabilities: somebody who has some kind of impairment. Again, it can be either one of the any one of the options that I mentioned before, which really affects in a significant way the ability of a person to act and do like everybody else in major areas of life. I always give an example. If we have 10 fingers and my little pinky finger is the one that is cut off, I mean, it's really frustrating maybe to pay for 10 fingers in a manicure and get only 9, but eventually it's not really limiting my movement, my activities in major areas of life, unless, of course, let's say I'm a pianist who needs all 10 fingers. But on the other hand, if I am losing my thumb, for example, then all of a sudden major things that I'm doing in the kitchen, at work, trying to open things, I really have a disability that is really affecting my daily activities. And that, according to Israeli law, is what we call a disability. Now, please note the various disabilities that I mentioned. Some of them are visible. You can see it. You can see a person in a wheelchair. You can see the cane. You can see the walker. You can see the guide dog. You can see the maybe very thick glasses where it's evident that there's some kind of visual disability there, or maybe big hearing aids, etc. or maybe features in the face, but still there are many disabilities that you cannot see. Today, the hearing aids are smaller and smaller and really are blending into our faces, and people might not even see that you're not that you're using one. Many people with visual disability, you cannot see until they really, take out the cane and start walking. And many, by the way, do not use any canes, and they're still legally blind. Cognitive disability or mental disability, learning disability, communicational, there's nothing really visual, definitely not at first glance, but still, it is all under the definition of a person with disability. Now, before we continue, let's really set our terminology straight. In the past, we used terminology such as disabled or crippled or handicapped. Now, please note, what is handicapped? It's hand in cap, because hundreds of years ago, or even tens of years ago, what could a person with disability do if not beg? And this is where this terminology comes from, and that is why we do not want anyone to use that. The way to say it today is a person with a disability. Note, not even disabilities. If I have one disability or 10, don't remind me how many I have. It's enough that I'm a person with a disability. There's one focus here on being a person. The disability is just one of many things that I have to describe myself. So we covered what is a disability, a person with disability. And now let's go to accessibility, Access Israel. First of all, accessibility, again, according to the law in Israel, and this is something that is basically common in many other countries, it is the ability to reach and enter a destination. It is the possibility to be able to receive a service and to be able to use a product. It's not enough to go into a place. It depends what happens once you're there. Make sure that you're getting the services or using the facility and the products that are offered there. And all that has to be done with dignity, with respect, as equals, with no, with a maximum level of independence and with no disappointment. Remember that people with disabilities all over the world are used to getting out of the house, going to do their, chores, their fun, their studies, and they get disappointed time after time, coming to places, maybe even places that promise accessibility, and being disappointed. So all this is part of accessibility. It's not only to get there, use the services and products, but to do it in a way that is dignified, in a way that sees the person and make sure that they will want to come back and return. Now, accessibility is one word, by the way, a word that is used a lot today in many contexts. So let's just limit it to the one we're talking today. Under accessibility, we have several types of accessibility. The first one is the physical accessibility, which was for many years the only definition globally we gave to accessibility. Physically, to be able to get to places, the road, the pavement, the entrance to a building, the stairs or the ramp, all this is part of the physical accessibility. In Israel, we call it part of the surrounding, the building itself, and how to get to that building. Everything that surrounds the building is part of the physical accessibility. Now note, a lot of people, when they're thinking about physical accessibility, they only see the wheelchair. When we're talking about accessibility, of course, we are talking about all types of disability. So again, we have the ramp maybe and no obstacles, so people in wheelchairs can go through, but we also have various requirements so the blind can walk freely and easily and independently, or at least with maximum independence, and people with cognitive disability, the signs and everything else. This is all part of the physical accessibility. Now, the second part of accessibility, which I can tell you in Israel was introduced about, I don't know, less than 20 years ago, is the services. It's not enough to be able to get into a building. what happens while you're there? Services that are provided have to be accessible also. This is another part of accessibility. Another part, which we will touch at the end of this presentation, is the technologies. Today, technologies are all around us. We have to make sure that those technologies are accessible. Even when you talk about, going to a bank, taking money out of the ATM, how do you do it when you are blind? The technology that is used by everyone has to make sure that it has solutions. So also the blind, for example, or people in a wheelchair or the deaf can communicate with that technology and really receive the services like everybody else. But another very important aspect, which I will touch on in a second, is the social accessibility. Now, taking everything that I said about accessibility now, let's bring it all together and see how we are achieving full accessibility. So as I mentioned, physical accessibility paves the way. It enables physically to get into places and integrate. The problem with physical accessibility, as I said, is it doesn't deal with what happened once you physically enter a place. This is why we need the service accessibility. The service accessibility gives a how-to instructions, focuses on the details, gives like a checklist of making services accessible. The problem is those checklists do not necessarily change the DNA of those service providers. It doesn't change the way or the tone or the look that a service provider might communicate to a person with disability in front of him. It doesn't eliminate the stigma. It's one thing to come in, people say, oh, don't sit here. People won't have a good feeling with you here. Please go over there. I mean, physically you entered, service you received, but would you come back if you got such a treatment? I don't think so. And that is where the social accessibility comes in. The social accessibility is really changing the DNA. It basically completes the previous types of accessibility and enables alternatives when basic accessibility is lacking. And we're talking about that later on, the human factor, and now we can make that an alternative when, sometimes things go wrong with accessibility and still a person is there standing and wanting to be treated as equals. It puts the person in the center. It is still a challenge because it's not something necessarily legally abiding. And it is a challenge to convey the message in a way that is optimal, not coming and begging, please look at us, please treat us as equals, but really coming as equals and changing the DNA of those standing in front of you. This together will bring for true inclusion, which is basically our goal. Now in Israel, we have some very unique things in our regulations. First of all, we have the equality law, which is like an umbrella law coming and saying, guess what, guys? People with disabilities have rights. It is their right to have an accessible world, accessible society. And it basically declares to all ministries, each one in their own neck of the woods, what they need to do or what areas do they have to make sure regulations are there on accessibility. Then we have the regulations. Under each ministry, there are the regulations that are relevant to them, whether it's education, it's health, it's transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the accessibility standards, which are basically the more fine tuning on exactly the measurement and how you do various accessibility solutions. Now, the unique thing about Israel is that there are many countries around the world where there are accessibility laws for physical and even services and maybe even training, but the usually or many countries are focusing only on the public sector, on the government, on the municipalities. In Israel, the requirement is all around for government, municipalities, private sectors, and NGOs. Everybody is committed and under the equality law and all the regulations and standards under it. Now, what are the advantages or uniqueness in Israeli's accessibility? First of all, the law has teeth. It's not just declaration on what needs to be done, but there are also options on what happens if you're not doing it. So this is something very important, you know, the carrot and the stick. So we definitely have the stick here. And as the years go by, because this is a relatively new law, we see more and more times where examples of this stick coming into effect. Another advantage is Israeli law requires two basically new positions. One is an expert, accessibility expert, somebody who has to go through a certain one-year course, go through an exam, go through an interview, really be a registered professional in the field of accessibility. And once he is such an expert, his expertise and signature will be required on various things that businesses will need to do to get approvals from the municipality or from various governmental agencies. Another important thing is an accessibility coordinator. This is an employee in a workplace that has more than 25 employees that basically is the go-to guy or the buffer between the service provider, the organization, and those receiving the services, the clients, the customers. And in many organizations, that person is also the go-to guy internally for anything that has to do with inclusion and accessibility in their organization. And I can tell you that this is a very important position and a very effective one. We have many examples in Israel of very large organizations where the person, the coordinator, is really a vocal point, a really important way of making sure that inclusion in organizations are done in the right way. Another thing about Israel is that we are a small country and our accessibility is on a country level for all disabilities in all areas of life. I know that I've traveled the world and saw in many places where the large municipalities, cities, big cities are accessible and everything is great. But once you take a car trip outside of the major metropolitan area, you see that the further you go, maybe it's less effective there, less accessible. Well, in Israel, because we are small countries and all the municipalities, big municipalities eventually are very close to each other, we see really a countrywide accessibility flow in Israel. Again, I'm not saying that everything is perfect as far as accessibility goes, but the half glass is very full. And we still have the half glass that is not full that we have to work on, but the full part is definitely something we can share and talk about. Another last advantage that I would like to focus on is something very unique in Israel. Israel is probably one of the only, if not the only country in the world where by law, it's mandatory to have training for every service provider, not only public sector, but also private NGOs, as I said before, every single year and at least once to do it in an experiential way, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And this is something that is very unique, and I can tell you that very effective. Now, in accessibility, we were talking about physical accessibility. Well, about physical accessibility, I won't really go into details, but we have to remember physical accessibility is a sequence. It's not enough to have an accessible entrance to a building or an accessible bus stop. Everything in between has to be accessible in order for the flow to happen. You can put in a lot of money and a lot of effort in making your building accessible, but if the road to the building is not accessible, well, you didn't really do anything because people with disabilities will not be able to enjoy what you did. So the sequence here, I have a sequence to a building that starts with the handicapped parking space, the lowered pavement to go from the road to the pavement, accessible pathways, stairs, ramps, elevator, entrance doors, signs. All this is part of the physical sequence. As far as accessible services go, here we have somewhat of a sun with rays. Each one is connected to the end user, to the people with disabilities and the elderly who are part of what we want to achieve here. So the accessible services include both the built and interior design. We have the service providers, the training that I mentioned, websites and applications that have to be accessible. And again, in Israel, everyone, there are some exceptions, but in general, everyone has to have an accessible website and application if it is catering the general public. Automatic kiosks, whether it's an ATM or some kind of queue reserving system in maybe the medical center or whatever. All these have to be accessible. Call centers, people who are deaf or with hearing disabilities have to be able to communicate with the call center, and not only those who can hear. Information that is given out, events have to be accessible, and of course, as I said, technologies. Now, as I said, accessibility, we can do a lot, but many times or sometimes things can go wrong. And here, the training that I mentioned before steps in. The human factor, if we give adequate and good training, can turn into the human ramp. And I can tell you that the Access Israel methodology for that, which is known globally, and we have been invited all over the world to do it, works. Not only does it work, it became law in Israel. The experiential part is really what it's all about. It's first of all knowledge. You have to know something in order not to be afraid of it. Number two is create an opportunity to get to know the person behind the disability. And this is something that we do in our training. Number three is the experience. It's not enough to talk or hear lectures about. Let's really sit in a wheelchair. Let's cover our ears. Let's shut our eyes. Really try to understand how it feels. And even especially you guys, whoever is trying to now develop something or change something or create something that will cater the entire population, including people with disabilities, this is something that is very important to do. And finally, the power to change. Eventually, each and every person that we do our training to receives the customization on how they can make a difference, how they can take the experience, the knowledge, and getting to know the people behind the disability that they experience and bring it together and make a change in their neck of the world. Now, just to do a small pause and reminder why we are here. So first of all, accessibility, we have to remember, is a means to an end. My name is Access Israel, but accessibility is not the goal. It's a way to achieve the goal, which is true inclusion. Note that I was talking about people with disabilities and the elderly. There are many similarities between the two groups. And first of all, about 50% of the elderly are people with disabilities, but also the other half are people that enjoy the benefits of accessibility. Another thing is the goal, inclusion, belonging. Again, accessibility as a means to an end. This is the end, the inclusion. And don't just check the box. What we are looking for is commitment from the top, from the head of the organization, the municipality, the country, etc. Now, this is something I saw on Facebook and I loved. Accessibility is being able to get into the building. Diversity is getting invited to the table. But eventually what we really want is inclusion, is having a voice at the table. Having our belonging is having your voice heard. So this is together what we need to achieve. Now, one last thing is the future of accessibility. We have to remember that for many, many years, accessibility was always retroactive. It was always fixing buildings to make them accessible, fixing services and teaching and training in order to make them accessible. Now we have a chance to change that retroactive paradigm, to really, take the era we're living in, the tech era, and make sure that technology, every single day we are faced with more and more technologies all around us. Let's make sure that those technologies are accessible by design. I can tell you that this is a project that we are really promoting in Israel, both trying to promote on the legislation levels, and also awareness, and bringing really companies to understand the importance in Israel and abroad. Again, it is not enough to come and say that we're going to have, let's say, the autonomic car that will serve everybody and make our transportational experiences better, safer, etc. If those cars will not be accessible, we have 18%, 20% of the population who will be left on the sidewalk and will not be able to independently use those autonomic cars. This is what we're talking about. We have a chance to make a difference. We have a chance to change the paradigm. And this is the whole idea. So if we achieve that, we have a great impact both on the social level, avoiding the widening of the gap, and enabling where in the past it wasn't possible to really do it. And I think that now, after COVID, many of us know that things that for years we were told are not possible, all of a sudden when everybody was stuck at home, when everybody needed to remotely communicate, we fixed things. We made sure that technology makes this possible. So let's do it in advance, and let's do it always on all technologies that are now introduced into our lives. And on a financial level, the cost of fixing retroactively is much higher than implementing it into the development stage. Once you include it in the development stage, it's part of the regular costs of developing a new product. We spoke about accessibility, we spoke about disability, we spoke about inclusion, and we spoke about the future of accessibility. We have to remember the basic terminology once we go out there and try to make a change. As I said, I'm Michal Rimon, the CEO of Access Israel, here very gladly to help and answer any questions. Please feel free to contact us at www.aisrael.org or in our emails. Mine is michal@aisrael.org, and the head manager of our international relations, Noah, is noahb, Noab, @aisrael.org. Thank you very much and good luck.